The alarm on my wrist unit buzzed twice before I even looked at it, and by the time I did, the corridor outside the docking bay was already full of noise. Shouting in 3 languages. Metal doors sliding open and shut too fast. Something had gone wrong on the transport ship, and I was still holding a stack of cargo manifests I hadn't even finished stamping. My name is Ethan Marlowe, and on that day I was nobody important. I worked logistics on Halleck Station, a neutral outpost sitting quietly between 6 alien territories that mostly tolerated each other and barely tolerated us. Humans were the newest species anyone had heard of, and most of the older civilizations treated us the way you treat a loud neighbor's kid. Something to be managed, not respected. I wasn't supposed to be anywhere near the council chamber that morning. I was supposed to drop off shipping records and leave. But the moment I stepped past the security checkpoint, I felt the tension in the air before I understood what was causing it. A child was screaming. Not crying, screaming, in a way that made every translator device in the room struggle to keep up, switching between panic and pure alarm faster than the software could process. I turned the corner and saw her. She was small, maybe the size of a 7- or 8-year-old human child, with pale blue skin that shimmered faintly under the station lights, and large black eyes that were wide with something I recognized instantly, even across species. Fear, not confusion, not anger, fear, the kind that lives in your bones. Around her stood 4 alien delegates, each one trying to get close, each one being met with a violent flinch or a desperate scramble backward. One of them, a tall Velkari diplomat with silver markings across his face, reached toward her slowly, speaking in a calm, practiced tone. She bit him. I stopped walking. I should have kept walking. I told myself that later, many times. A woman in a station administrator's uniform noticed me standing there and hurried over, her face tight with stress. Her name tag read Claire Bexley, and I vaguely remembered her from logistics meetings, though we'd never spoken directly. "You need to leave," she said quickly. "This is a restricted situation." I was just dropping off. "Now, Marlowe, this isn't for civilians." But the child had already seen me. She stopped screaming. The room went quiet in a way that felt unnatural, like the air itself had been startled into silence. Every alien delegate turned to look at her, then followed her gaze across the chamber, until every eye in the room was on me. I didn't move. I didn't know what to do. I was holding a stack of shipping manifests like an idiot, standing in the doorway of what was clearly a very serious diplomatic incident, and a traumatized alien child was staring at me like I was the only solid thing in a room full of static. Then she ran. Not toward the door, not away from the delegates in some general direction of escape. She ran directly at me, crossing the entire length of the chamber in seconds, and before I could even react, she collided into my legs and wrapped her arms around me so tightly I nearly lost my balance. The room erupted. Diplomats shouted. Someone activated an alarm. A tall alien with dark red robes stepped forward, gesturing sharply, saying something in a language my earpiece hadn't fully translated yet, but I understood tone well enough. He was furious. Claire grabbed my arm. "Do not touch her. Do not encourage this." But the child had buried her face against my side and was shaking, her small clawed hands gripping the fabric of my uniform like it was the only thing keeping her upright. "I'm not doing anything," I said. "I just walked in." "She has rejected every Guardian candidate for 6 hours, Claire said, her voice low and urgent. 6 hours, Marlowe. Ambassadors, her own species relatives, trained caretakers. She wouldn't let anyone near her." I looked down at the child. Up close, I could see thin scars along one side of her face, faint, but clearly not accidental. Her clothes were simple, plain, the kind given to someone with nothing else to wear. She wasn't looking at the delegates anymore. She was looking at me, and her black eyes held something that didn't need a translator at all. "Don't let them take me." I didn't know her language. I didn't know her species' customs, her biology, her history, or why she was even on this station in the first place. But I understood that look, because somewhere underneath all the fear, there was a request. A simple one. Stay. The tall, red-robed alien stepped closer, and this time his tone was sharp enough that the translator caught up instantly. "Remove the human," he said. "This creature does not belong in a security-sensitive negotiation." "With respect, Counselor Dreyeth," Claire said carefully, "the child is currently attached to him. Physically, forcibly separating her could cause further trauma." "She is a ward of the Kethrian Accord," Dreyeth snapped. "Her placement is not a matter for station personnel, and certainly not for an unlisted species representative." Unlisted species. That was the polite term for what most of the galaxy called us. New, untested, beneath consideration in matters of real importance. I felt the child's grip tighten around my waist as his voice rose, and something in me reacted before I could think it through. "You're scaring her," I said. The room went silent again, this time for a different reason. I don't think anyone expected me to speak, least of all the counselor. He turned toward me slowly, his expression somewhere between disbelief and offense. "Excuse me?" "Your voice," I said, trying to keep mine steady. "It's loud. She's already scared. You're making it worse." Claire's hand tightened on my arm again, a silent warning, but I didn't stop. "I don't know anything about her species," I continued. "I don't know what happened to her, but I know what fear looks like, and she's terrified, and shouting at each other over her head isn't helping." For a long moment, nobody said anything. Then an older alien, one I hadn't noticed before, stepped forward. She had soft gray skin and wore the deep green robes of what I would later learn was the Mediation Council, the neutral body meant to oversee disputes between species on stations like this one. "Director Holt," Claire said quietly, and I realized the woman speaking now held significant authority here. Director Holt studied me for a moment, then looked down at the child still clinging to my side. "What is your name?" she asked me. "Ethan Marlowe." "And your position on this station?" "Logistics, cargo processing mostly." She nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something she'd already suspected. "The child's name, as best our translators can determine, is Vessa. She is the sole survivor recovered from the Ashmere colony 3 days ago." I had heard about Ashmere. Everyone on the station had. A colony of nearly 4,000 beings, gone in a matter of hours. The official reports called it an environmental catastrophe, though even then, something about the phrasing had felt careful, rehearsed. "She was found in a maintenance shelter 2 days after the colony went silent," Director Holt continued. "Since then, every attempt to assign her a guardian, from her own species relatives to trained trauma specialists, has failed. She does not speak. She does not eat unless forced. She has not slept more than an hour at a time." I looked down at Vessa. She had stopped shaking, though her grip on my uniform hadn't loosened at all. "And you think I have something to do with that?" I asked. "I think," Director Holt said, "that you are the first person she has approached without being forced to." Counselor Dreyeth made a sound of clear disapproval. "This is absurd. The child's placement must follow proper protocol. A human logistics worker cannot simply become her guardian because she latched onto him in a moment of panic." "With respect, Counselor," Director Holt said calmly, "your proper protocol has produced 6 hours of escalating distress and 0 cooperation. I am not suggesting a permanent arrangement. I am suggesting we stop making things worse." She turned back to me. "Mr. Marlowe, I understand this is not something you volunteered for, but would you be willing to remain nearby while we assess the situation further?" I looked down at Vessa again. She still hadn't let go. If anything, her grip had tightened, as if she understood exactly what was being discussed and was afraid of the answer. "Yeah," I said. "I mean, yes, of course." Dreyeth's jaw tightened, but he said nothing further, though the look he gave me before turning away told me clearly enough that this wasn't over. Not for him. Claire exhaled beside me, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. "Well," she said quietly, "I did not expect my morning to go like this." "Neither did I admitted. Director Holt gestured toward a side room adjoining the chamber. "Let's move somewhere quieter, for her sake, and honestly, for all our sakes. As we walked, Vesa never let go of me, matching my steps as best she could with her much smaller legs, her face still pressed against my side. I didn't know what I had just agreed to. I didn't know what she had survived, or why a council official was already treating this as more delicate than a simple guardianship dispute, or why Councillor Draith's anger had felt less like protocol and more like something personal. All I knew was that a frightened child had run across a room full of powerful strangers and chosen me, a low-ranking human nobody, over every trained professional and diplomat in that chamber. And somehow, in a single morning, that choice had already made me part of something far bigger than cargo manifests and shipping schedules. I just didn't yet understand how much bigger it was about to become. The side room Director Holt led us to was smaller than the main chamber, with soft lighting and none of the harsh metallic surfaces that made most of the station feel cold. Vesa finally loosened her grip on me once we sat down, though she stayed pressed against my side on the bench, refusing to put any real distance between us. Claire stood near the door, arms crossed, watching the two of us with an expression I couldn't quite read. Director Holt took a seat across from me, folding her hands in her lap. "I want to be direct with you, Mr. Marlowe," she said. "What happened in that chamber was unusual, not just unusual for a human, unusual for anyone." "I still don't understand why," I said. "I didn't do anything special. I just walked in." "That may be exactly the point," Director Holt replied. "Every Guardian candidate she was presented with today approached her with intention, trained calmness, practiced gestures. Vesa has spent 3 days surrounded by people trying very hard to seem safe. You didn't try to seem anything, you were simply there." I looked down at Vesa. She had curled slightly into herself, her small hands resting in her lap, watching Claire and Director Holt with the wary stillness of someone deciding whether it was safe to relax. "What actually happened at Ashmere?" I asked. "The reports said environmental failure." Director Holt's expression shifted, just slightly, before settling back into careful neutrality. "That is the official statement, yes. But you don't think that's the whole story?" "I think," she said carefully, "that a colony of nearly 4,000 beings does not typically fail in a way that leaves exactly one survivor, hidden in a maintenance shelter, with no trace of the failure's cause anywhere near her." A chill moved through me that had nothing to do with the station's climate controls. "You think someone did this on purpose?" "I think many things, Mr. Marlowe, most of which are not appropriate to discuss with station logistics personnel." She paused, and something in her tone softened slightly. "Though given the circumstances, you may find yourself more involved in this than either of us expected." Vesa shifted beside me, and I felt her small hand find mine, gripping it the way a child grips something during a fall, instinctive and desperate. I looked down at her, and for the first time since the chamber, she looked back at me directly. Her black eyes weren't just afraid anymore. There was something searching in them, like she was trying to understand whether I was real, whether staying near me was actually safe, or just the illusion of safety before another disappointment. "Hey," I said quietly, not really sure what else to say. "You're okay." She didn't respond. I hadn't expected her to, but her grip on my hand loosened slightly, just enough that it no longer felt like she was bracing for impact. Director Holt watched this exchange carefully. "The council will need to make a temporary decision regarding her care," she said. "Given today's events, I intend to recommend that you serve as her interim guardian, under station supervision, until a permanent arrangement can be determined." "Me?" I said. "I don't know anything about her species. I don't know their customs, their needs, their biology. I don't even know what she eats." "Neither did any of the specialists who tried and failed today," Director Holt said. "What she needs right now is not expertise. It is stability. You may be uniquely positioned to provide that, whether either of us understands why." Claire finally spoke from her place by the door. "Councillor Draith will not approve of this." "Councillor Draith does not need to approve of it," Director Holt said evenly. "This is a mediation council matter, not a matter for individual delegation heads, regardless of how forcefully he insists otherwise. There was something in the way she said his name, careful and deliberate, that told me this disagreement went back further than this single morning. Why does he care so much? I asked. About who her guardian is, I mean. It seems like a strange thing for a counselor to get personally worked up over. Director Holt hesitated, just long enough that I noticed it. Counselor Draith represents interests connected to the Ashmere colony's governing administration, she said finally. It is natural that he would take a close interest in the sole survivor's well-being. It sounded rehearsed, the kind of answer given to satisfy a question rather than actually answer it. I decided not to push further, not yet, though I filed the moment away carefully. Over the next several hours, the arrangements were made faster than I expected. Temporary housing was assigned near the station's residential ring, closer to medical services than my usual quarters. A small support team was appointed, mostly to monitor Vessa's physical condition, though Director Holt made it clear that I would be the primary point of contact and care. Claire, somewhat reluctantly, was assigned as a liaison between myself and the council, mostly, I suspected, to keep an eye on the arrangement and report back on how it was going. By the time evening arrived, station time, Vessa still hadn't spoken a single word, but she had stopped flinching every time someone entered the room. She sat on the edge of the small bed in our new quarters, watching me carefully as I tried to figure out what she might actually eat. The nutrition specialists had left several ration packs designed for her species, based on incomplete biological data recovered from Ashmere's colony records. I opened one, unsure of what to expect, and offered it to her slowly. She stared at it, then at me, then, cautiously, she reached out and took it, holding it in both hands like she wasn't entirely sure it was allowed. "It's yours," I said gently. "You can eat it." I don't know how much of my tone she understood versus my words, since her translator implant was still calibrating to her specific dialect, but something in the moment seemed to register. She took a small, hesitant bite, then another. It was such a small thing. A child eating a single ration pack, but something in my chest loosened watching it happen, a tension I hadn't fully realized I was carrying. "There you go," I said quietly. "See? Nothing bad happening here." She didn't smile. I wasn't expecting her to, not yet. But she didn't flinch either, and for someone who had spent 3 days rejecting every offer of comfort from trained professionals, that felt like something significant. Later that night, after she had finally fallen asleep, curled into a tight ball at the edge of the small bed, Claire arrived at the quarters for a final check. "How is she?" Claire asked quietly, glancing toward the sleeping child. "Better than this morning," I said. "She ate. She's actually sleeping instead of just lying there." Claire nodded slowly, though her expression remained troubled. "Council data shows she hasn't slept more than an hour at a stretch since her recovery. If she stays asleep for longer than that tonight, it will be the first real rest she's had in 3 days. Is that normal? For her species, I mean." "We don't have enough data on her species to know what's normal," Claire admitted. "Ashmere's colony kept most of their internal records isolated from wider council access. A privacy protocol, officially. Though given everything else about this situation, I'm beginning to wonder how much of it was actually about privacy." I thought about Counselor Draith's tight expression back in the chamber, his insistence that Vessa's placement follow proper protocol, his clear discomfort with the very idea of a human caretaker. "You think someone doesn't want her cared for," I said slowly. "You think someone would rather she stay unstable, difficult to place anywhere permanent." Claire's eyes flicked toward me, sharp and assessing. "I didn't say that. You didn't have to." She was quiet for a long moment, glancing again toward the sleeping child. "I don't know what happened at Ashmere, Marlowe. Officially, I'm not permitted to know, but I've worked station logistics long enough to recognize when reports don't add up, and this one hasn't added up since the day it happened. So what do we do?" "We do exactly what we're doing," Claire said. "We keep her stable, we keep her cared for, and we pay very close attention to anyone who seems unusually interested in changing that." After Claire left, I sat quietly in the dim light of the quarters, watching Vesa sleep. Her small chest rose and fell steadily, none of the tense, guarded stillness from earlier in the day. Whatever she had survived, whatever she had witnessed at Ashmere, some small part of her seemed to have decided, at least for tonight, that it was safe enough to rest. I didn't know yet what I had actually agreed to that morning. I didn't know the scale of what was hiding behind Ashmere's official reports, or how deeply Counselor Draith's interests ran, or how much danger might still be circling a child who had simply wanted, more than anything else, someone who wouldn't try too hard to seem safe. But watching her sleep peacefully for the first time in days, I understood one thing clearly enough. Whatever came next, I wasn't walking away from this. Not now. Maybe not ever. 3 weeks passed before I understood that the quiet routine we'd built was never going to last, and it ended the night I found Vesa standing in the corner of our quarters, wide awake, staring at nothing, whispering a word over and over in a language the translator still couldn't fully process. By then, things had settled into something resembling normal, or at least a version of normal that made sense for two beings who barely spoke the same language. Vesa still hadn't said a full sentence, not one my translator could confidently interpret, but she had started making sounds. Small ones, a hum when she was calm, a sharp intake of breath when something startled her, and once, memorably, something that might have been a laugh, when I dropped an entire tray of ration packs across the floor of our quarters and stood there, looking genuinely confused about how it had happened. She had also started drawing. It began almost by accident. I'd left a datapad out one evening, one used for basic cargo notation, and found her the next morning tracing shapes across its surface with careful, deliberate motion. At first, the shapes meant nothing to me. Curved lines, small clusters of dots. But over time, patterns began to emerge, and I realized she wasn't just scribbling, she was documenting something. I brought this up during one of Claire's regular check-ins, showing her the datapad while Vesa sat nearby, quietly working on another drawing. "These aren't random," Claire said, studying the screen carefully. "Look at the recurring shapes here, and here." "I noticed that too," I said. "I don't know what they mean, but she draws the same things over and over." Claire enlarged one section of the drawing, a cluster of angular lines surrounding a circular shape. "This almost looks architectural," she said slowly, "like a facility layout. You think she's drawing Ashmere?" "I think," Claire said carefully, "that we should have someone with actual expertise look at these, rather than guessing ourselves." That someone turned out to be a xenopsychologist named Priya Okafor, a soft-spoken specialist Director Holt brought in discreetly, away from the wider council's attention. Dr. Okafor spent nearly 2 hours reviewing Vesa's drawings, her expression growing more serious with each new page. "These recurring structures," she said finally, spreading several drawings across the table, "they match public schematics of Ashmere's central research facility. But look here." She pointed to a section repeated across multiple drawings, a small enclosed room within the larger structure, always drawn with the same distinct marking, a jagged symbol scratched with visible pressure into the page. "She keeps returning to this specific location," Dr. Okafor continued. "In trauma processing, especially in young children, recurring imagery like this often points to the source event itself, not the aftermath, the cause." "You think something happened in that room," I said. "Something she witnessed." "I think it's possible," Dr. Okafor said carefully. "Though I want to stress, this kind of assessment is far from certain. Children processing severe trauma often express fragments rather than complete memories. We cannot simply assume this drawing is a literal map." "But it's worth investigating," Claire said. "It is worth investigating very carefully," Dr. Okafor agreed. "And very quietly." That word, quietly, stuck with me long after the meeting ended. Everything about this situation seemed to require quiet, careful movement, as though loud questions asked in the wrong direction might bring consequences none of us were prepared for. Over the following days, I noticed something changing in how Vesa related to me, something beyond the simple routines of eating and sleeping we'd established. She began seeking me out during small, ordinary moments, not out of fear, but out of what I slowly recognized as comfort. She would sit near me while I reviewed cargo schedules, not because she needed anything, but simply because she wanted to be close. One evening, while I sorted through shipping manifests at the small table in our quarters, she climbed onto the chair beside me and placed her datapad down, showing me a new drawing. This one was different from the others. Simpler. A single figure, tall and rounded, standing beside a smaller figure, both surrounded by soft, uneven circles that might have been meant as light, or warmth, or something else entirely. "Is that us?" I asked quietly. She looked at the drawing, then at me, and nodded, once, small and deliberate. It was the first time she had responded to a direct question without hesitation, without the guarded stillness that usually followed any attempt at conversation. Something in my chest tightened, not with sadness this time, but with something closer to hope. "That's a good drawing," I told her. "I like it." She studied my face carefully, as if checking whether I meant it, and then, for the first time since I'd met her, she smiled. Small, fleeting, but real. I wanted to hold on to that moment, to let it exist without complication, but the universe apparently had other plans, because less than a week later, everything changed again. It started with an unscheduled visit from Counselor Draith. He arrived without notice, flanked by 2 council security officers, and requested immediate access to Vesa's quarters, under what he called a mandatory wellness review. Claire, who happened to be present at the time, immediately objected, citing the temporary guardianship protections Director Holt had put in place, but Draith was insistent, and his tone left little room for negotiation. "This is standard procedure," he said coldly, "for any ward under provisional care. I am well within my authority to conduct this review." "With respect, Counselor," Claire said carefully, "Director Holt's office should be notified before any review of this nature." "Director Holt's office has been notified," Draith interrupted. "This review proceeds regardless of her office's preference in the matter." I stood near the doorway of our quarters, Vesa pressed close against my side, her earlier calm evaporating the moment Draith's voice filled the room. I recognized the tension returning to her posture instantly, the same rigid stillness from that first day in the council chamber. "She's scared of you," I said quietly. "You should probably know that." Draith's eyes flicked toward me, sharp with irritation. "Her comfort is not the priority of this review, human. Her stability and proper development under approved cultural guidelines is." "Approved by who?" I asked. "You?" "By the appropriate governing authorities of her species," he said, his tone clipped. "Authorities you are not qualified to question." I felt something harden inside me, a stubbornness I hadn't fully recognized in myself until that exact moment. "She's not a case file," I said. "She's a kid who watched her entire home disappear. Maybe the appropriate governing authorities should focus less on paperwork and more on that." For a moment, something flickered across Draith's expression, something that looked almost like alarm, quickly smoothed back into cold professionalism. "You overstep, human." "Maybe," I said. "But I'm not moving." The standoff lasted several tense minutes, until Claire, working her personal comm unit quietly in the background, managed to reach Director Holt directly. Within 20 minutes, Director Holt arrived in person, her expression carrying a controlled anger I hadn't seen from her before. "Counselor Draith," she said, her voice deceptively calm. "I was under the impression we discussed proper notification procedures regarding this ward's care." "This review falls within my authority," Draith insisted. "This review," Director Holt said, "falls squarely within the jurisdiction of the Mediation Council, which I represent, and which you do not. You will schedule any future assessment through my office, with proper notice, or you will not conduct it at all." The two of them exchanged a long, tense look, something unspoken passing between them that felt heavier than the words actually said. Finally Draith turned and left without another word, his security officers following silently behind him. Once the door closed, Director Holt exhaled slowly, some of the controlled tension leaving her shoulders. "I apologize for that," she said. "This should not have happened without warning." "Why does he keep pushing?" I asked. "What does he actually want?" Director Holt hesitated, glancing briefly toward Vesa, who had finally begun to relax again against my side. "I cannot discuss ongoing council matters in detail," she said carefully. "But I will tell you this. Counselor Draith's interest in this child predates today, and predates even the Ashmere incident itself." "What does that mean?" "It means," Director Holt said, "that I am currently investigating whether his connection to Ashmere's administration was closer than officially disclosed. And it means you should continue exactly what you have been doing. Keep her stable, keep her cared for, and do not, under any circumstances, allow her alone with him or his representatives." That night, after Vesa had finally settled into sleep, I sat awake far longer than usual, turning over everything Director Holt had said, everything Claire and Dr. Okafor had pieced together from Vesa's drawings, the recurring image of that small enclosed room within Ashmere's facility, the jagged symbol scratched with such visible pressure into the page. Something had happened in that room, something Vesa had witnessed, something significant enough that a council official was willing to override proper procedure just to gain unsupervised access to a traumatized child. I looked over at her sleeping form, curled peacefully for once, her small hand still loosely gripping the edge of my sleeve even in sleep, an instinct that hadn't faded despite weeks of relative safety. Whatever truth was hiding behind Ashmere's official reports, whatever Draith was so desperate to control or contain, I understood clearly now that it was no longer just about a child needing a guardian. It was about a witness needing protection. And somehow, without ever intending to, I had become the only thing standing between her and whoever wanted that witness silenced. The message arrived at 3 a.m, station time, and I knew before I even opened it that something had gone badly wrong, because Claire never contacted me that late unless it was serious. "Come to Director Holt's office immediately. Do not bring Vesa. Leave her with the assigned security officer outside your quarters." I read it twice, my stomach tightening with each word. Vesa was asleep beside me, curled into her usual position at the edge of the bed, and for a moment I considered ignoring the message entirely. But something in Claire's tone, even through text, told me this wasn't a request I could refuse. I woke the security officer stationed outside our door, a quiet, competent woman named Grace Fenwick, and explained the situation as briefly as I could. She nodded, already alert, and took up position just inside the doorway, close enough to hear if Vesa woke and became distressed. "Go," Grace said. "I've got her." The walk to Director Holt's office felt longer than it actually was, my mind racing through every possible reason for an emergency summons at this hour. When I arrived, Claire was already there, along with Dr. Okafor and Director Holt herself, all three wearing expressions I didn't like at all. "What's happened?" I asked immediately. Director Holt gestured for me to sit, though I remained standing, too tense to settle into anything. "We received an anonymous data transmission 2 hours ago," she said. "Internal Ashmere facility records. Records that were supposedly destroyed along with the rest of the colony's infrastructure." "Destroyed how?" I asked. "That is precisely the problem," Director Holt said. "According to official reports, Ashmere's destruction was environmental, a catastrophic failure of the colony's atmospheric processing systems. But these recovered records tell a very different story." Dr. Okafor activated a display screen, and I watched as fragments of internal communications scrolled across it, heavily redacted, but still legible in places. "Ashmere wasn't just a colony," Dr. Okafor said quietly. "It was hosting a classified research initiative, something involving experimental biological enhancement protocols, the kind of research most galactic governing bodies have strict restrictions against, due to past incidents involving uncontrolled outcomes." "What does this have to do with Vesa?" Claire answered this time, her voice careful. "According to these records, Vesa was part of the research population. Not a bystander, Marlowe, a subject. The floor seemed to tilt slightly beneath me. She was a child, I said. You're telling me they were experimenting on children? We're telling you what the records suggest, Director Holt said, and what they suggest is deeply troubling. When the research began producing unstable results that apparently included behavioral changes in the subjects, along with escalating structural damage to the facility itself, someone made the decision to shut the entire operation down. Permanently. They destroyed the whole colony to cover it up, I said slowly, the full weight of it settling over me. 4,000 people. To hide an experiment. That is the theory these records support. Yes, Dr. Okafor said. Though we still do not have full certainty regarding the mechanism of destruction, or who specifically authorized it. And Vesa survived because she was recovered from a maintenance shelter far from the facility's central structure, Director Holt said. The same shelter, notably, that appears in her drawings, marked with that recurring symbol you and Claire noted weeks ago. I sat down finally, my legs no longer entirely steady beneath me. The room she keeps drawing, I said, that's not where something happened to her. That's where she hid, where she survived. Likely, yes, Dr. Okafor said gently. And Counselor Draith, I said, the pieces finally locking into place with sickening clarity. He's not just connected to Ashmere's administration. He's connected to this research program. Director Holt's silence answered the question more clearly than words could have. He wants her because she's a loose end, I said, my voice rising despite myself. A living witness to whatever actually happened there. That's why he keeps pushing for unsupervised access. That's why he's so desperate to control her placement. We believe so, Director Holt said quietly, though proving it formally, in a way that would hold under council law, is another matter entirely. These records were transmitted anonymously, which means their origin cannot be verified through official channels. Draith's legal representatives would argue, likely successfully, that the documents are fabricated. So what do we do? I asked. We can't just sit here knowing this and do nothing. We protect her, Claire said firmly. That's what we do. Regardless of what we can or cannot yet prove in a formal hearing, we ensure Draith never gains unsupervised access to that child. And beyond that? I asked. Director Holt exhaled slowly. Beyond that, Mr. Marlowe, I intend to push for a formal council investigation into Ashmere's true circumstances, using these records as a starting point, regardless of their contested origin. It will not be simple. Draith has allies within the council who will resist this at every step, but it is the only path toward real accountability. And what happens to Vesa while all of this plays out? She remains with you, Director Holt said, under increased security and under my direct oversight. I will not allow her to become a casualty of bureaucratic slowness, not after everything she has already survived. I nodded, though my mind was still racing through everything I'd just learned. A research program experimenting on children, a colony destroyed to hide the results, a counselor with enough influence to nearly walk unsupervised into a traumatized child's quarters under the guise of routine procedure. And at the center of it all, a small girl who had run across a crowded chamber weeks ago and chosen, for reasons none of us fully understood, to trust a low-ranking human logistics worker over every trained professional and powerful diplomat in that room. Maybe, I thought, walking back toward our quarters afterward, she hadn't chosen me because I seemed safe in some obvious, practiced way. Maybe she'd chosen me because I was the one person in that entire room who had nothing to gain from her, nothing to hide, nothing calculated about my presence at all. When I returned to our quarters, Grace looked up from her position by the door, relief crossing her face. She woke up about 10 minutes ago, she said quietly. Got upset when she realized you weren't here. I managed to calm her down, but she's been asking, in her own way, where you went. I found Vesa sitting up in bed, her eyes red-rimmed, clutching her datapad tightly against her chest. The moment she saw me, she scrambled forward, wrapping her arms around me with the same desperate grip from that very first day in the council chamber. "I'm here," I said quietly, holding her carefully. "I'm not going anywhere." She pulled back slightly, studying my face with an intensity that felt far too knowing for a child her age, as if she could sense that something significant had shifted, even without understanding the details. "You're safe," I told her, though the words felt heavier now than they had just hours before, carrying a weight of responsibility I hadn't fully grasped until this moment. "I promise you, Vesa, whatever happens, you're safe." I didn't know at that point whether I could actually guarantee that promise. Draith was powerful, connected, and clearly desperate enough to bend procedure in his favor. But looking down at her small, exhausted face, finally beginning to relax again now that I'd returned, I understood one thing with absolute clarity. I was going to keep that promise, no matter what it cost me. The formal hearing was scheduled for 8 days later, and every single one of those days felt like walking across a floor that might give way beneath me at any moment. Director Holt worked quietly behind the scenes, gathering support from other council delegates, cross-referencing the anonymous records against fragments of publicly available Ashmere data, and coordinating with Dr. Okafor to prepare an assessment of Vesa's drawings that could hold up under formal scrutiny. Claire split her time between logistics duties and near-constant security coordination, ensuring Vesa was never left without at least 2 layers of protection at any given moment. I spent those 8 days doing the only thing I really knew how to do. I stayed close to Vesa, kept our routine as steady and predictable as possible, and tried not to let her see how frightened I actually was underneath the calm I forced myself to maintain. She noticed anyway. Children always do, regardless of species. 3 days before the hearing, she pulled out her datapad during a quiet evening and drew something new, something different from her usual recurring imagery. 2 figures again, the tall one and the small one, but this time surrounded by a solid, unbroken circle, thick and deliberate, drawn over and over until the line was heavy and dark. "What's that?" I asked, pointing to the circle. She studied the drawing for a long moment, then looked up at me, her black eyes serious in a way that made her seem far older than her small frame suggested. She placed her hand over the circle, then over her own chest, then reached out and placed it gently against mine. I understood, even without a translator confirming it. Protection, safety, the 2 of us, held together inside something unbreakable. "Yeah," I said quietly, my throat tight. "That's exactly right." The morning of the hearing arrived with a tension I could feel in every corner of the station. Director Holt had arranged for Vesa to remain in a secure adjoining room during the actual proceedings, with Grace and Claire both present, while I was called to testify directly regarding the events of the past several weeks. The chamber was fuller than I'd ever seen it. Delegates from species I recognized and several I didn't, all gathered to hear a case that had apparently drawn attention far beyond our small station. Councillor Draith sat near the front, his expression carefully composed, though I noticed his hands remained tightly folded throughout the entire proceeding, a small tell of tension beneath his controlled exterior. Director Holt presented the case methodically, walking the assembled council through the timeline of events. Vesa's rescue, her rejection of every guardian candidate except myself, the recurring imagery in her drawings, matched against Ashmere's facility schematics, the anonymous data transmission detailing the classified research program and its catastrophic, deliberately concealed collapse. Draith's legal representative rose immediately to challenge the evidence's legitimacy, exactly as Director Holt had predicted. These records, he argued, originate from an unverified anonymous source. They cannot be treated as credible evidence in a formal council proceeding. "I agree," Director Holt said calmly, surprising several delegates in the room, including, I suspected, Draith himself. "Which is precisely why I have not asked this council to accept these records as conclusive proof. I have asked only that they be treated as sufficient cause for a formal, independent investigation into Ashmere's true circumstances." A murmur moved through the chamber, delegates exchanging glances, weighing the reasonableness of this careful framing. An investigation, Dreyeth's representative said, based on documents of unknown origin, targeting a sitting councillor's reputation, seems an extraordinary and unprecedented request. With respect, Director Holt replied, I would remind this council that we are not discussing reputation. We are discussing the destruction of an entire colony and the ongoing well-being of the single known survivor. If Councillor Dreyeth has no connection to the events described in these records, an independent investigation will confirm precisely that and clear his name definitively. I fail to see what objection a truly uninvolved party would have to such a process. The logic was clean, careful, and difficult to argue against without appearing to have something to hide. I watched Dreyeth's expression carefully during this exchange, and for the first time since I'd met him, I saw something crack beneath his composed exterior. Not panic exactly, but something close to it. Then I was called to testify. I hadn't prepared a speech. I hadn't practiced careful diplomatic language the way I imagined council witnesses usually did. I simply stood before the assembled delegates and told them the truth, as plainly as I knew how. I described the first day, Vessa's screaming rejection of every trained professional in that chamber, her sudden, desperate run toward a stranger she'd never seen before. I described the weeks that followed, her silence slowly breaking into small sounds, small drawings, small moments of trust rebuilding themselves one careful piece at a time. I described Dreyeth's unscheduled attempt to gain unsupervised access to her quarters, and the fear that had returned to her posture the moment his voice filled the room. I don't know the legal details of what happened at Ashmere, I said finally. I'm not a diplomat, and I'm not an investigator, but I know what it looks like when a child is afraid of someone specific, and I know what it looks like when that same child feels safe. Vessa has never once, in the weeks I've known her, shown fear toward anyone except Councillor Dreyeth and his representatives. I don't think that's a coincidence, and I don't think this council should treat it as one either. The chamber was quiet after I finished speaking, quiet in a way that felt different from the tense silence of that very first day. This silence felt like consideration, like weight being properly measured for the first time. Dreyeth's representative attempted one final argument, insisting that a child's instinctive fear could not be treated as formal evidence of wrongdoing. But Director Holt's earlier framing had already shifted the room's mood, and I could see, delegate by delegate, expressions shifting from cautious neutrality toward something closer to conviction. The vote, when it finally came, was not unanimous. Several delegates connected to Dreyeth's broader political alliances abstained or voted against the motion, but the majority, a clear and decisive majority, voted in favor of launching a formal, independent investigation into Ashmere's true circumstances, with Councillor Dreyeth's activities specifically included within its scope. As the ruling was read aloud, I watched Dreyeth's carefully composed expression finally give way entirely, something cold and furious flashing across his face before he forced it back down beneath practiced diplomatic calm. He rose without a word and left the chamber, his representative hurrying to follow. Director Holt approached me afterward, her expression carrying the first genuine relief I'd seen from her since this entire situation began. That went better than I dared hope, she admitted quietly. Is it over? I asked. No, she said honestly. An investigation of this scale will take months, possibly longer. Dreyeth will fight it at every step, using every political resource available to him. But it is a beginning, a real one, backed by formal council authority rather than quiet suspicion. And Vessa? Director Holt's expression softened. Given today's ruling, and given her clear, consistent preference throughout this entire ordeal, I am prepared to recommend that her guardianship arrangement with you be formalized, pending only standard long-term wellness reviews. Not temporary this time, Mr. Marlowe. Permanent, should you wish it. I felt something loosen in my chest, a tension I'd been carrying since that very first morning in the council chamber, weeks that felt now like an entire lifetime ago. I wish it, I said, more than anything. When I returned to the adjoining room, Vessa looked up immediately, scanning my face with the same searching intensity she always carried, trying to read the outcome before I could even speak it aloud. I knelt down in front of her, meeting her eyes directly. "It's okay," I told her softly. "You're safe. Really safe now. Not just for today, for as long as you want to stay with me." I'm not certain how much of the specific words she understood, but something in my tone or my expression must have carried the meaning clearly enough, because for the first time since I'd known her, she didn't just lean into me for comfort. She smiled, wide and unguarded, an expression of pure, uncomplicated relief that I hadn't yet seen from her in all our weeks together. Claire, standing nearby, wiped at her eyes quickly, pretending she hadn't, while Grace simply grinned, shaking her head slightly at the two of us. "You know," Claire said, her voice a little rough, "when this all started, half the station thought assigning a logistics worker as guardian to a traumatized alien child was the strangest decision the council had made in years." "And now?" I asked. "Now," Claire said, glancing toward Vesa, who had settled contentedly against my side, "I think it might have been the smartest one." In the weeks that followed, the investigation into Ashmere moved forward slowly but steadily, uncovering layer after layer of the concealed research program, each new revelation adding weight to the case against Draith and those connected to him. It would be a long process, Director Holt warned repeatedly, with setbacks and resistance at every stage, but it was real progress, built on solid ground rather than quiet suspicion, and that alone felt like a victory worth holding on to. Vesa continued to heal, slowly, unevenly, the way real healing usually happens rather than the neat, tidy version people sometimes imagine. She began speaking more, small words at first, then simple sentences, her translator finally catching up to a dialect that had taken weeks to properly calibrate. She still drew constantly, though her drawings gradually shifted away from that recurring haunted imagery of the maintenance shelter toward simpler things. The station's observation deck, Claire's small, careful smile, the two of us, always the two of us, surrounded now by soft, warm colors instead of uneven, anxious circles. I never fully understood, even after everything that happened, exactly why she had chosen me that very first day, out of every trained professional and powerful diplomat crowded into that chamber. Director Holt had her theories. Dr. Okafor had hers. I suspect the truest answer was simpler than any of their careful analysis suggested. She hadn't needed someone impressive, or credentialed, or practiced in the careful language of trauma and diplomacy. She had needed someone who would simply stay, without calculation, without hidden agenda, without trying too hard to prove anything at all. And in the end, that turned out to be the one thing every other species in that chamber, for all their advanced knowledge and ancient diplomacy, had somehow failed to offer a frightened child standing utterly alone in the wreckage of everything she'd ever known. It hadn't taken sophistication, or status, or galactic influence to earn her trust. It had only taken showing up, and choosing, without hesitation, to stay.